Oh, hello, everybody. Thanks for dropping into this episode of The Oracles. It's me, James, and today I'm joined by Prema Lee Gurreri. She is a Vedic astrologer out of Washington State, and we're going to be talking about the difference between Western astrology and Vedic astrology and something called the Sacred Wealth Code. You can find her on her website, solutionary.com, and you can actually go to her YouTube, too. It is Prema Lee Gurreri. Now, Gurreri spelled G-U-R-R-E-R-I. G-U-R-R-E-R-I. Prema Lee Gurreri on YouTube. Please drop by and check her out there. Also, her website, solutionary.com. And it's very, very interesting. Prema is a leading Vedic astrologer, consciousness coach, and business consultant with more than 25 years of experience. She's an award-winning author of Your Sacred Wealth Code, Unlock Your Soul Blueprint for Purpose and Prosperity, and the creator of Your Sacred Wealth Code Oracle Cards and the Sacred Wealth Code Journal. And I'm going to grab myself a set of Oracle cards and the book, because if you know anything about me in astrology, I need the book. Using the ancient science of Vedic astrology and her gift of intuition, Prema guides and teaches conscious women visionaries to activate their divine gifts and align with their sacred wealth code so they can unlock their soul blueprint for purpose and prosperity. Prema is committed to creating a world where you're empowered from the inside out to live according to your soul blueprint, on purpose, aligned with your high-value gifts and your birthright of true wealth. And we will discuss what true wealth is. Again, go to our website, solutionary.com. It's SOULUTIONARY, solutionary.com. Our YouTube is Prema Lee Gurreri.com, not .com. Prema Lee Gurreri on YouTube, as well as Prema Lee Gurreri on Twitter. Lots of ways to find her. Go check her out. Check out her books. Check out all the links that she has on her website, which we will talk about in the interview. And we'll also be talking about the upcoming solar and lunar eclipses. First, I guess, the lunar, and in November 19th, I believe it is, and the solar eclipse, December 4th. I'm going to go get Liam, and he's going to start up the show, and Prema will be with us shortly. Liam?
I see you found our little hiding spot in the universe. Don't get too comfortable. This is a place where you will find those with an experience that's out of this world, or possibly deep within your life. I welcome you to the Oracles with James Tyson. Lean forward and listen. We will pull you into a supernatural journey with guests from around the world, each one experiencing some of the most extraordinary phenomena this wee planet has to offer. Now, here are the Oracles with James Tyson.
Thank you, Liam. Hey, and thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and thank you, Prema, for dropping by.
It is my pleasure to be here with you today.
We had some glitches, but at least it got you here, which is
hey, we're flexible, you know. That's how we don't get bent out of shape.
Yeah. Yes, we do. We do. I get bent out of shape sometimes, but it's all caused by my computer. And then I just have to walk away and giggle a bit and come back and everything's fine. You have some fascinating, I don't want to say they're ideas, but you have this thing called, we talk about, when I can actually get words out, we talk about the Sacred Wealth Code, and you connect it to a thing called Vedic Astrology. But what is the difference between regular astrology and Vedic astrology?
So it's Vedic astrology, and it's okay.
It's an E in it.
and the reason it is Vedic astrology is because it comes from the Vedas. And the Vedas are 6,000-year-old texts of India, of the Indian continent, but it comes from India. And Vedic astrology and Western astrology have a couple of differences. We are looking at the same sky. We are looking at the zodiac, and we keep time a little bit differently. Vedic astrology has been around, like I said, for over 6,000 years. It's the older version, and it is really developed by the ancient seers and sages. And it's also where Western astrology can be tracked back a couple thousand years back to Greece and more of the European continent. Also, it is the true placement of the planets. It's the sidereal zodiac as opposed to the tropical zodiac that Western uses. And what that means is that if you look up in the sky right now and we see the planet Venus through a telescope, or you can actually see it in the sky, Venus is actually in Sagittarius right now. And that's not, tropical zodiac is going to calculate it and differently. So we are sky watching astrologers. I'm not saying Western astrologers aren't, but the planets are actually where they are currently. There's also several different layers of Vedic astrology, meaning that I like to think of it as like there's this mansion, and whatever you're trying to look at is in the center of this mansion, and the whole mansion is glass. And we can go up to the foyer and we could look at what we want to look at. And there's a whole other window we can look through down in the basement, and one over in this room. There's many different layers, charts, calculation type systems within Vedic astrology. So it's a rather deep subject. We have a solar and a lunar calendar. Western astrology is really looking at the solar calendar. And because we keep time a little differently, we are really looking at time as it is, meaning that, yes, we have a starting constellation of Aries, both systems do, but the date on where Aries starts is a little bit different because we are actually looking in Vedic astrology about the equinoxes when they're actually happening. We're not saying when they, fixing that system, because it is actually things in the heavens move. One other concept that's a little bit different is we are looking at the same planets, but we look in Vedic astrology at the planets of light and give them the most value on what they represent. And that is not including the outer planets. We don't give them representation of things. So what I mean by that is Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, Saturn, and then the nodes of the moon, that they all have things of significance that they represent, where Pluto, Uranus, Neptune, and the outer planets, which are not planets of light, they do not reflect the light of the sun. They come into play at a lesser value. We don't give them a rulership of a constellation or of a house. So those are some of the differences, not to boggle anybody's mind, but those are the differences.
How did you find this side of astrology?
Yeah, Vedic astrology. I was always interested in astrology and in Western astrology, and I studied that to it. And but I was also a yoga teacher and very much into, the Vedic sciences. So all of the Vedic sciences, including Ayurveda, which Deepak Chopra made very popular in the West, came from the Vedas. There's 8 different limbs of yoga, and all of that body of knowledge came from the Vedas. So I was very steeped in that body of knowledge. And like Ayurveda is very familiar to most people in the West, and it translates to the science of life. And Vedic astrology, which Jyotish is the Sanskrit word, it translates to the science of light. And so we're looking at quantifying and seeing what the light, what value the light has and what it has for one in particular. So I gravitated because that's the realm of study that I was in. And then when I realized Vedic astrology, and then I went and saw a Vedic astrologer, it just really put a lot of pieces together for me. And it is such a deep, rich study. I mean, I've still studied with my mentor. I mean, I'm on the board of Vedic astrologers, but I study with my mentor because it's definitely a spiritual practice. The study of it is. And
you've got a book on this.
So The Sacred Wealth Code is a book that is, it's Your Sacred Wealth Code, Unlock Your Soul Blueprint for Purpose and Prosperity. I look at the Vedic chart as being a version of, because there's other ways to look at one's soul blueprint, but that's my version of looking at one's soul blueprint. And within looking at the soul blueprint, people usually want to know, what's my purpose? Where's my relationships? How do I, what am I supposed to be doing? How do I make money from that? And these are questions, and what am I good at? These are questions I've been answering for a long time with people. And the way the book was born and the way Your Sacred Wealth Code was born, it's actually based off a scientific principle within Vedic astrology. There's the science part of it, and then there's the art in reading it. You have to be intuitive at some level to read it. And so this is where your purpose and prosperity actually intersect within your chart, within your soul blueprint. Everybody has points of this. And so after really looking at that for years, it started to drop in I want to say, a more user-friendly way for me to give people that information in a way that they could digest it for themselves, interpret it for themselves, make sense of it, and also make sense of how they are blocking it as well. And so your Sacred Wealth Code really is this amazing place within your soul blueprint where your purpose, what you're here to do at many different levels, because there's different levels of purpose, and your prosperity, your wealth, which is really what you need to acquire to fulfill your purpose, where that actually is, and how do we access it? And Sacred Wealth Code is really that access point. And what I have found is that this is where our highest value gifts are, the things that we are so unique at the way we do them. Like we all might be, there may be many teachers, there might be many engineers, but the way that, you or I or someone else animates that gift and the gifts within that is very unique to the individual. And so I found this is where people's highest value gifts was at this point of purpose and prosperity, which is essentially your Sacred Wealth Code. And when people, and this is one of the big parts of what I do, is support people to understand that and then understand how to step into and animate those gifts and clear the shadow, the blocks that are keeping you from really being in your gifts, so that they can have the fulfillment that they want, but they can also have the prosperity that's really right for each and every one of us, because what's valuable to you, what's valuable to me, what's valuable to somebody else, what makes them feel wealthy is very different. One unplugs from all the programming that we have and really gets down to the core of it. That's what really brings in that fulfillment and that satisfaction for us. And that's I'm really passionate about that. So I use it in lots of different ways, but this whole body of work sort of downloaded and has evolved over time into a body of archetypes. And there's a journal and an oracle cards. And so that I can, either people can work with my materials to access on their own, or I can do their reading. And with some people, I work with them in my groups or personally over a period of time to help them. Then what do I do with these gifts? How do I bring them out in the world? And so I end up working with a lot of entrepreneurs and creatives.
Now, when you talk about wealth and prosperity, it's not that we all have to be millionaires. You're talking about wealth and prosperity, again, getting out of what we perceive it is, or what we've been told wealth and prosperity is, but it gets it down to what actually, this is the amount you need to get to where you're supposed to be. And that would be different for everybody, wouldn't it?
Yes. And let's quantify need a little bit. So, because they're a little bit different. So need is usually when we're coming from lack, and want is when we're coming from desire, which, and so a lot of the work that I do is really based on really accessing the heart. So we really are accessing our true desires and not the desires that are being imposed on us. But yes, what you're saying is true. What I believe that wealth is everything we need to fulfill our purpose. So yes, we do need resources, but it's not always money. And so it might be knowledge, it might be connections and relationships, it might be some other sort of tools and resources. It just ends up being money because we exchange money for a lot of those things in the paradigm that we're living in. And also I would just want to say why it is that I believe that wealth is everything you need to fulfill your purpose. If I'm looking through the lens of Vedic astrology, we have purpose houses. We have 3 of them. We have 3 wealth houses. We have 3 relationship houses and 3 spiritual houses, and they all sequentially follow each other. So after every purpose house, there's a wealth house. And so, first you realize your purpose, but then how do I access that? How do I achieve that? And eventually that helps us come to relationships, which is actually a fulfillment of desires, because we tend to do that with connection with other people. And then eventually we relinquish that and we realize what's really true. And at some level, we let that go. Okay, so, I believe that we're living in an expanding universe, and part of what expands that universe, because there's a lot of things that do, but I want to say the purest expansion of the universe is our own heart's desires. And that could be your personal world, but the world at large. And that's why we are all connected to more at some level. We could say, hey, that's the American way. It's always about, well, I have this, but I want more, I want more. So there is a cultural conditioning around that. Absolutely. That definitely pulls us off our path to a certain degree. How many people have you heard about that have made tons of money or whatever, but their relationships crash or they end up losing it all or whatever? If you're on your purposeful path, and some people are wired to acquire more than others, you won't crash and burn as much as if you are, really off your path and crashing and burning. But this coming from more, we're so stuck in our culture that when we want more, but we believe we need more, then we're coming from lack. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
And so unfortunately, and that's also part of the conditioning we're under. It's like, okay, well, you need more, but do you really need more, or do you want more? And it's totally fine to want more. But if you're in the need of it, then you're in the lack of it. And that causes a lot of problems for one. Whereas, hey, I'm grateful for everything I have and I want that too. Okay, that's awesome. I love my ice cream sundae with my hot fudge, but I actually want the cherry too. It's okay to want the cherry, but I'm going to be fine if I don't have it. So, just that bit of a slant, because it's just, I think more than ever, it's so easy to get pulled off our path. We have so much information coming at us. We can see what so many people are doing or what they want us to think they're doing, depending on how we're looking at it, that, we're not as in touch with ourselves. It takes a lot. Let's put it this way. It takes more effort to really be in touch with ourselves than ever. So I don't use this practice as prediction, but I do use it to help people understand what I call the celestial weather and to help them understand themselves. Because I believe the more you understand yourself, the more you can master this being of yourself, the better service you're going to be, the happier you're going to be. And when the tough times come, because they come for all of us, that we know when that bad weather is coming and we can prepare for it, and we can prepare for how we're going to navigate through that, because those are really the soul challenges that we've been given. Because at some level, there's parts of us that want to wrestle with things and grow, even as inconvenient as it may be.
One of the things I struggle with is ego. And unfortunately, through this medium and through just my kids and life, my kids who are now young women, it's social media effects and the actual ability to look at what someone else is doing. And then I think, well, I want to do that. Like, I want to have the ability to go to the Mediterranean and spend a month on an island somewhere. Well, yeah, that would be nice. Really, is that for me? Is it on my path? Or is that my ego saying, I want to be that person too? So then I have to really draw back and go, you know what? I'm happy right here. It's looking outside of my reality and basing my reality on everybody else's supposed reality, or what they've shown us through social media or even media on what this is the standard we all should be at. And it's not. You really have to take a step back and going, okay, just calm your butt down. I don't really need to be on an island for a month. I can be happy right here, and I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing right now. But it's that ego struggle. It's that pulling myself back. And it's the number one thing is identifying it's an ego struggle.
Absolutely. That's a big part of it. And that's why I believe the more self-aware we can be, the more we can understand, the more we can manage our own energy and make better choices for ourselves. So in understanding, just to also touch on something else you said, what you're supposed to be doing right now, to understand, really what is our purposeful path at this given time, or with what it is, because it might be, your purpose might be a little different in relationship than it is in the work you're doing in the world. Right now we have a purpose in having this conversation. It's really the big why underneath everything else. But when we can really tap into what our divine gifts are, what our highest value gifts are, and this is really where my passion is, then we can use those as a navigational tool. And when you're using your gifts, obviously you have a gift to be able to have, these kinds of conversations. You were talking about some of the other work that you were, doing and acting and such. So that, we all have whatever gifts we have, but some of our gifts are just the things we're good at because people have told us we're good at, or we've gotten recognition that way, or that's how the safe way to make money is, or whatever it might be. But your true gifts, those things that you were like just born with a PhD in, that you gravitated towards. I have children too, mine are all in their early 30s, but when one is given the right environment, and we can do that for ourselves, even as adults, to really explore what it is that we're really good at. And that's why I think this work is really important, because I can laser in and help somebody understand what they, really what your gifts are. And when you're using your gifts, it's like a key that you can unlock in the world that nobody else can. And when you do, the world will recognize you for those gifts only when you fully stand in them. And unfortunately, a lot of times we're trying to use our gifts, and we kind of use them just a little bit. We tiptoe out with them, and then we're looking to, is this what I'm supposed to be doing? And that's not the way it works. We have to fully stand behind ourselves. We have to fully animate our own light within whatever our gifts are, for the pure joy of being that and doing that. And then we tend to be seen for doing that. And then there's the whole shadow side of our gifts, because a lot of times our power, our gifts can be locked up in our shadow. And the shadow's not a bad thing. It's just the places that are unseen. It needs to be brought into the light. In fact, I have a whole chapter in my book about this. This is I work on 4 levels with people. So there's the insight, intuitive piece, which also I look at the Vedic astrology piece. This is all heart-centered work. So I have a lot of work that I do with teaching people to really connect with their hearts. And because I believe we are feeling all this energy anyway, and to be able to really hear your own truth and trust yourself and make better choices. And then there comes to clearing our blocks and clearing our shadow. And that's the energy work. And that's super important. And then finally, we can get down to some strategic action after that. But if we can't step out of that shadow, that's like, if you think, for yourself, for anyone listening in, where, you're trying to stretch in an area, trying to do something, but you keep getting sort of, it's almost like you have a bungee cord on your back, and you get snapped back again into the same old pattern again. And these are just places we're unconscious of, and we need to have a way to shine some light into those places. And instead of pushing them away, it's like a young child who stubbed its toe. We need to wrap our arm around that part of ourselves and find out what is going on. And as you mentioned, the ego, it's some ego part that got rooted in very early in life and has a misguided directive for us, and is pulling us off track a lot. So within the sacred wealth code system, there are archetypes. I have a couple on the wall behind me. They're also illustrated in the cards, and there's 3 for each planet. But along with your gifts, which you understand when you start to dig into your archetypes, there is the shadow side, and it is of great value to say, oh, I am stuck in being a people pleaser, or I am stuck in overgiving, or I have some narcissism that's going on there, and realize that is natural for me in my gifts. And so what do I need to do to shift that, and work with that to unlock some of our energetic currency that's locked up?
Yeah, I've always told people you come with a toolkit and you add tools to it, but I don't think you ever remove them.
And there's some that we might access for a lifetime. I kind of see it as a spiral that's shaped like a funnel, like an upside down cone. And as we're traveling through life and we're going around and around the spiral, and the circle gets wider and wider, and some things we're going to still come upon, some soul challenges. But the more we learn about ourselves, we don't hit them as often. And when we do, we know how to deal with them. We've woken up more in that area. I just want to touch on a little bit of the current energy. We had a little bit of a hard time getting on the interview today, because computer stuff, stuff happens. We have an alignment with Mars and Mercury right now that's really causing some internal pressure and some communication difficulties, but Mercury is also representative of technology. So sometimes that comes into play. But so where are we? We're November 10th. And between now and the end of the year, so now between now and the end, middle of December, it's a bit of a turbulent time. We have a couple of eclipses were coming up. And this is one thing I like to make people aware of, is what the energy is going to be. And then when I'm doing a reading, of course, or a client, more specifically, how is that going to impact you? But we're in a very highly changeable period of time. And we have an eclipse on the 19th of November, which is a lunar eclipse. And then we have a solar eclipse on the 4th of December. The solar eclipse is more potent than the lunar eclipse, but they both have their challenges and their gifts. These are points of growth. In the Sacred Wealth Code archetype system, it's the mystic, the south node of the moon, and the magician, the north node of the moon, that are caused, it's the points in the ecliptic, and they're always hitting two astrological houses. So right now, it's happening in Taurus and in Scorpio, and that's been going on for the last year. This is the third pattern of eclipses, and it'll be the last pattern of eclipses. Then in the spring, that whole nodal axis will change to Aries and to Libra, and that's where we'll all experience whatever that represents in our chart. That's where we'll experience this, I want to say, turbulent, stormy energy that causes us to have to grow, like it or not. It agitates certain areas of life. But knowing that in November, it's an unstable time, it's an unstable month and the beginning of December in a lot of ways. There's other stability, there's other strength going on. But on November 19th, I always say to mark the day before, the day of, and the day after an eclipse. And it's likely to be highly emotional. And what this part of the eclipse pattern has been working on us around is letting go of our attachments around security and what security is for us, and sort of shaking us up a bit in that particular area of life, or collectively, if we want to look at collectively. And that's how, like, if you look at YouTube and look at my updates, they're collectively, so anyone can tap into them. But, where are you overly attached? This is something that it's a good for everybody to look at right now, especially around your security, your comfortability. Maybe you're too comfortable in some areas. That's really holding you back and keeping you from moving forward. Where are you, have a perception that you're secure, but if you really look at it, you're not so secure. Or where are you maybe selling yourself out or selling your soul a little bit in order to have that security, whether it's in a relationship, whether it's in a job, whether it's in, a certain community, or whatever that might be. Because we will do that. And that's one of the things that eclipses will do, is they'll come around and they'll shake this area of life up and cause us to have unexpected things going on that come to the surface. This eclipse will feel very emotional, and there are unexpected things will come to the surface for us around that particular 3-day period of time, where the solar eclipse has a longer trajectory. And so, and again, if I was going to say, what is this specifically for you or anyone else, I just have to look at your chart to know what that is for you. For me, it's happening in a place of divine purpose. And so what I'm attached to around purpose has been shaken up. But sometimes we have planets in these placements, and I have some clients that have been just getting hammered on this axis. But the good news is we knew it was coming. We strategized for it. Just because there's a storm coming doesn't mean you can avoid the storm. Well, you could fly and go to a different state or a different town. But we know that, okay, we're not going to try to do certain things. If this is happening in my house, a home, I might be having a change in home, but it's actually going to cause me more stress to try to make a change in home. If I have to deal with it, I'll have to deal with it. But let me see where I can hunker down for now and let the storm pass, and then make a clearer choice. Because when eclipses are going on, it's a shadow period of time. It is a shadow that comes between the node of the moon is a shadow that can come between the sun and the moon, the soul and consciousness, and really is the only thing that has the power to block the sun is the nodes of the moon. And so think of dawn and dusk. That's when most accidents happen. You can't see everything in that kind of light, in a shadowy light. So you can't see all your choices. So it's not a good time to make choices. It's a good time to chop wood, carry water, go with the flow, do your inner work on whatever emotions are coming up for you. And especially between now and then, and like I advise my clients in my programs and my personal clients to I've been telling them, okay, well, go and use some of the clearing processes. Notice what you have around your attachments around security. Let's look at that. And let's look at that where that's happening for you, so you can work on it now instead of getting hit with something, out of the blue that comes up where you have an emotional upset. Then you're in the thick of it. You can go ahead and mitigate it by having some awareness around it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's I'm fascinated with astrology to start with. I don't know very much about it. Even the traditional astrology. I have a friend who's an astrologer. It's like handing her information and she puts it in a machine and then tries to explain it to me, and I'm just look at her like, no, I don't get this at all. But yours, it flows better. Like I can see it in my head. Does it make sense?
Well, that's a compliment to me, because that's my goal is to, and I'm a very humanistic astrologer, but my goal is to, and I'm also, communication is one of my gifts, but is to actually make it into digestible information in plain English so that you can use it. Otherwise, we have enough information, even enough insight without action, information without embodiment does nothing but just jams our circuits mostly, or makes us, like a lot of my clients are very conscious. And because you're conscious doesn't mean you have embodied that consciousness, that it takes more than that. We have to move what we know about our soul down to the soles of our feet. But there's a gap between people who tend to be more conscious. And how do I know? Because I've had to work through this, and I continue to work through this. So it's like knowing that, a gratitude practice is really great. That's going to put you in more of a state of receivership. It's going to bring it. There's all kinds of scientific proof on how that affects everyone around you. But knowing that is not going to bring you any of those goodies unless you actually do it, and unless you're actually engaged in a gratitude practice. And sometimes those who are more conscious, more awake, are just on to the next thing without the time to move through the densest part of ourselves, which is the final frontier, which is our physical body. So my goal is to help you, to give people tools and resources and language that they can actually latch onto, personalize, and then make good use of.
I agree. I've talked to so many people who practice a certain belief system which gets in their life path to get where they perceive that they should be going. They'll deal with forgiveness, and then completely move on to the next thing, and then move on to the next thing, and then but they're forgetting to practice what they're talking about and actually finishing the job on themselves before moving on to the next thing, because they've learned a new modality, or they've learned this new word and they've read a book on it and went, okay, now I totally understand that. What's the next thing? And you have to actually own the first one before moving to the second one. So, and I think the universe sends us stuff to test us anyway. So,
absolutely. Life is a practice. I taught yoga for 30 years, and I would always say in teaching yoga that it is, this is the practice on your mat for when you walk out the door. Anything that's going on for you is going to show up, and we do a lot of the same foundational poses in order to once in a while do a pose in the back of the book. And that's true about spiritual practice in general. It is a lot of repetition of the fundamentals and of the foundation. We're complicated, but we're not that complicated. And if we work with the foundation, then we can work with, the things that are a little outside the box as they arise. I'm going to give a little bit more information about the next eclipse is coming, but also want to touch on the sacred wolf archetypes, because so for a long time, I was really helping people to understand, just through this communication and words and such, what their gifts are, where their shadow was, really transcending that into what the purpose is, and then how they should use that in the world, whether that is infusing those gifts into what you're already doing, or whether you wanted to write a book or create a foundation or start a business, whatever that might be. But then the archetypes dropped in. And when I say dropped in, because this is a piece of channeled work based on a scientific principle. And again, my intention, and one of the ways I'm wired up in my chart, is to create tools of enlightenment, literal tools you can use to wake yourself up. So archetypes are a soul language. I can say to you, I have a few sitting here, I could say the engineer or the honorable warrior. Those are both Mars's archetypes. I was talking about Mars and Mercury. The communicator. We've got the magician, the visionary. I could say any of these archetypes. And right now, anyone listening in, a story just opened up about what that is, very personal, to like in your own personal language where you can understand it. And so each one of the archetypes, there's a scientific basis around it, which I won't geek out on. Okay. So they're not arbitrary. They're actually very specific for each one of the planets. There's 3 for each planet, 1 for the north, 1 for the south node of the moon. But as I'm looking at someone's gifts, because it is based on the interaction of the planets, instead, I'm giving them the actual archetype that represents that planet, the expression of that planet. Then they know that in their sacred wealth code, they have a visionary, they have a magician, they have a teacher, and there's some other unique identifiers I put before that. And then they can start to read about it or to learn about it. And then I've got tools for that. And even in my book, it goes into all of the archetypes and helps you just by going through the workbook, playbook of my book and the exercises for you to choose your own archetypes. And so this personalizes the practice, and also the shadow is involved with that too. It allows you to have a relationship with this part of you, which like inner guides, instead of thinking of this planet. It's this language that allows you to connect to that energy, and it evolves and over time and as your understanding does. So the archetypes are super, super helpful to help everyone. Like you could have a communicator in your chart and I have one in my chart, but the way I relate to it may be very different than the way you relate to it, because it's unique to you. Because I want people to, again, understand themselves, master your own self. So the archetypes are super useful in helping you to understand your gifts and your shadow in a personal language that you can understand.
At the beginning, you said that for those who are reading it, it'd be easier if you were intuitive?
No.
Okay.
That's if you're going to be a Vedic astrologer. It is a science. You can learn it like you'd learn any science, okay. Biology, anything else. It's a science and it's an art. So there's a difference where I could regurgitate the actual science of what it means when Mars is here or whatever. But to actually look at somebody's chart and actually interpret that and what that means for them, that's where the intuition kicks in.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And typically someone who is an intuitive psychic, who's wired to be an astrologer, which I have those wirings, and we see that in the chart. And we're all intuitive. We all have intuition, absolutely. Yeah. But what's it wired for? And how do we use it? In fact, that's something that I teach a lot about, because we all have intuition. So it is a science, but it's an art to actually interpret that science uniquely to collectively for us, and then uniquely to the individual. Then there's another level of intuition that is, and so I'm thinking to think of that more of how you use your intuition. So another level of intuition is like, we all have it. We all are empaths at some level. I work with a lot of empaths to help them really understand what kind of an empath they are. So that's where you're talking about kind of like, okay, how do I quantify this? What is it best used for? We're all a little different in that way. As a kid, I was the highly sensitive kid. I also have some wiring that makes me very functional and grounded in the world. I wasn't just completely off in the sensitive realm, but I was very sensitive, and it kind of freaked my mom out. So I had to keep that kind of turned down, because I always was told I'm too sensitive. And so, but I also had a lot of experiences where I was put in situations where really there should have been some adults around to help me through. And I had to only rely on that voice inside. So I can look at my karmas, my soul challenges, and see now with perspective how I was being groomed to really use my abilities, but it was not necessarily pleasant. And I went through some really hard times with that. I was always able to pick up information. And I believe on some level, we can all be either do or can be taught to understand how we do pick up information on that intuitive sense. And I think that's really valuable. So that's something that I really incorporate into my work and teaching, because we're all picking up information all the time. And and a lot of times we take it on and it jams our circuits. Like my husband, wired really different than me, but he has a great intuitive sense around his investments and speculations around that. And so what I've what he's relied on me for is, because I have a great sense about that, but I always turn him back to him because he actually has a really great sense. He's like, oh no, and it really works out well for him. So bringing his awareness to that has enabled him to start to rely more so on himself. And of course, when you make an intuitive decision and then later you see how it worked out or didn't work out, we learn a lot from that, but you learn how to trust yourself. I have some specific practices that I teach people around getting the answers from your heart, tuning in and getting just the next step, the next inspired action. And when we take those inspired actions, which are tuning in, it is on an intuitive sense, or I call them soul directives, then you start to be able to trust yourself because you see how that works out. And one of the things, and this is, not to go too off in the weeds over here, but one of the things that really keeps us from being able to trust ourselves is because the mind wants to know how it's all going to work out. That's the left brain. That's that's us creating the future from the past in a very safe way. It's the ego part of us. And because we want to know how it works out, a lot of times we stop ourselves from just taking the next step, that next soul step that you've been given, whether you got it in the shower or you got it in meditation, or you just have this hunch, or you specifically dropped in your heart and got it. Because if you take that step, first of all, you'll never be given something that isn't really yours and isn't going to bring you into a greater understanding of yourself, even if it is not the easiest choice at the moment, but every choice you make then opens up a new set of choices. So that's why you can't map it completely all the way out, because every step you take, it's like driving from LA to New York. There's a lot of different ways to get there. MapQuest can give you the shortest route. But if you get hungry and then you want to go see a national park or whatever, you're over here in another state, well, now you've got to make some different choices to get back on your track or to go there a whole different way. So when we can start to really honor those intuitive hits that come up and just give ourselves the space to take the next step, make that choice, and then breathe, and then look around, we start to trust ourselves, and we start to see that things open up very new and different for us. And when that's really what we're craving.
How do you teach your clients, or how do you persuade your clients to trust that gut feeling, to get them to understand that their gut feeling is their intuition, and therefore you should really rely on that information as it comes? Yeah.
So I'd like to think of it as I teach them to. I don't talk them into or persuade them, but I teach them.
It's funny. I didn't want to use the word teach. Like I kept thinking, because it sounded too forceful. For some reason, I was trying to get around.
No, that's fine. No, but that's the reason we're having a conversation, is because there's people who are going to relate to what you say and people who are going to relate to what I say, and different things are going to relate up for different people. So it's perfect. So I teach them to, and I do that by, I have several different things, but one of the main things that I do, or at the core of everything I do, because I create meditations, I create clearing processes, I create processes that people can, activations where I'm either doing that live with my people, or I've created a lot of tools and resources in my programs where people have a whole member site just chocked full of them. So that they can, like for instance, I was working with a client over the weekend who was at an event. She had an event, and she had people enroll in her program. It was a 3-day event, and she had a friend enroll, and she knew, like, her intuitive hit was like, this person does not belong in this program. And she had, her mind was telling her a lot of reasons. So I hopped on, actually voice messaged with her a little bit. And then I gave her a practice to do. And the practice that I gave her, the recording I gave her to do, led her into her heart, which we close our eyes, tune into the heart, really breathe through the heart, get the mind to drop down into the heart. And once we do that, we're in this nice, safe place. And from there, I gave her some directives to look at the situation from the lens of the heart, and look at it from 2 different vantage points. This was specific for her situation, or someone having to make a hard choice at the time. And what she saw was, first of all, was that her gut was right. And what she was feeling upset about was her mind and her gut, her mind and her intuition fighting over something, that it didn't feel right for this friend for a number of reasons and what she needed to do, the directive was to have an honest conversation. And that was just the next step. So she had the honest conversation, and there was a lot of goodness that came from that. And still, she doesn't feel like this is the right next step, but she's got the right next step for the person right now. And this is someone close to her and is a friend. So especially in leadership, these kind of situations absolutely come up, and you get torn in two directions. And I just share that with you because a lot of times it's your mind and your gut, your mind and your heart, pulling on one another. And that mind, it's that shadow side, or like the ego side, is always trying to keep us safe. It's not trying to do anything bad or wrong. It's just stuck in time, usually because of some other programming. And it is, and it's too scary to look at what's happening with the new choice that's coming up, the intuition that's coming up. So that's why a daily practice, to answer your question really specifically, and I have something called a soul wisdom meditation. And so a daily practice of tuning into your heart, not when you necessarily need to, just as a daily practice. Within that meditation, there's some gratitude, there's some visioning involved, but really learning how to sit in your heart and find out what your soul directive is for the day. Find out what your heart wants for you, and find out what's the inspired action for you to take based on what your heart wants for you. And when you start to take that, it's just like going to the gym. It's just you're starting to exercise your trust muscle. So it's like it's better to not wait till you're in an acute situation and you have to figure it out. Let's practice it when it's nice and easy. Like when you're when you're bringing in, when you're disciplining your kids or bringing in a different way you want them to be or teach them something. Let's do it when the problem isn't acute. And if we can do it when the problem isn't acute, then we've got the skills built up when the problem is acute, that things are going to make a lot more sense. So I'm also on my website, there is a free quiz that helps people, that lets you get one of your Sacred Wealth Code archetypes. And if anyone messages me, I'm happy to share my soul wisdom meditation with them as well. And the soul wisdom meditation, it's a 12-minute meditation, and it will actually, I think I have a link for you that actually will give you a link to both of these things. And I'm happy for people to have them because they're free and they're super useful. And so I'll make sure that you have that link. But anyway,
what's your website?
Meditation. Say again?
What is your website? My
website, Solutionary, SOULUTIONARY.com, solutionary.com. So this soul wisdom meditation is the best thing I've come up with to help people to get in touch with their intuition, strengthen that muscle, strengthen their trust muscle, and actually take action based on your intuitive hit on a daily basis.
Perfect. So that's the hardest one, like for me, is, well, again, fighting. It's one of those fights that I have. That in the ego one, and the, reaching to that toolbox. It's going with my gut and understanding why. And for a lot of intuitive people, it's, or let's the overused word empath, our gut feeling will think, and I always use this example, somebody will offer us to buy the Brooklyn Bridge and you think that's a scam. And in the back of your head, you're saying, you always wanted a bridge. And it's that conflict. It's like, it's wrong, but what if? And that is, it's more the sparkly intuitive types or the empath people. We're that kind of trusting, and you just go, no, dummy, you were right the first time. I do readings for people, and I often they have a decision coming up in a couple of weeks, and you already know what the answer is because their gut feeling, their intuition is telling them what the right answer is. The rest of all the crap around it is them second guessing themselves. And
absolutely. And that's why I've got a couple of things that allow people to decipher what those are. But we have to do that from the lens of the heart. The mind is going to take us on a lot of journeys.
Oh yeah. It's like squirrel, we're off doing something else and your heart's looking at you like, here we go again. Here's another lesson. And when they come back, we'll explain to them what they did wrong. But yeah, it's hard.
That's another great thing about knowing what your gifts are, because the more solid you are in your gifts, the more, and there's an intuitive way I teach people to really connect with your gifts and your archetypes. It's like these guides that are always with you, and it gives you sort of your own, I call it your wealth council, to bounce some of this information off. And again, with regular practice, you get to see what's a yes, what's a no, what feels right, what doesn't feel right, what feels open, what feels closed, what feels bright, what feels heavy. We get to know our own internal language for what is right for us at any given time. I have a big principle that I teach that has never failed me, and that is, if it's not a big yes, it's a no. And there's a big gray place in between yes and no. And yes and no is a very masculine concept, but it's very useful, because not that anything's wrong with the masculine, I just teach a lot about the feminine concept. And we've been talking a lot about feminine energy as far as the heart and the right brain and intuition. But if it's not a yes and you allow something to be a no, like if it's not like 27 different gradients of yes and no, it's like, is it a yes? You know what that feels like. And if you allow it to be a no and really allow it to just be a no, it may stay a no, it may turn to a yes at a different time, but now you've cleared you're free. You're free of being in between all of that. And people are really afraid we all have FOMO, really afraid of missing out. And so we're afraid to or disappointing someone, but I really also believe what's good for you and what's truly good for you, right, and good for you, is actually good for everybody, whether they know it or not. So it's really important, again, to be able to have the different ways to understand, what's for us and what's not for us. And if it's the in-between area and you're in the gray, if you can just let that be a no, not now, you'll let things sort out, because it just might be a timing issue as well.
In hindsight, again, going back, timing and interpersonal interactions is a big part of what I used to do as a policeman. In hindsight, going back, as I would have an interaction with somebody, and at that time, they may perceive it as being a negative. And socially, it was a negative because I arrested them for breaking into a house. But at the time, that intersection that we both had, that split second in the great universe, was a deflection. They went off on they may have changed paths, or there was an interference in the path that they were on that, in hindsight, ends up being a good thing for them and
right.
for the people who own the house. And for me, it was a paper. It was literally administrative. You kind of arrest the person, fill all the paperwork, and I just kept going on my path. What I left behind was a change in two people's paths, the victim and the person who caused the event. So now they're off on and trying to learning from what they did and move on. Like the person now who owned the house has a better lock on the door and has a better understanding. Well, that's a cheap way of saying it. They psychologically, there's a change. And same with the fellow who did it, the young man or young woman who did it. Most likely there was an addiction issue and some other challenges they were going through, and this delayed it or gave them another opportunity to take counseling or whatever. So it was all these little interactions that were minuscule, but looking back, it was that interaction on the path, negative, or what was perceived to be negative, or even in some cases positive, that little bump, like marbles on a floor bumping each other and going off into different directions, but it was all supposed to happen, and moving on and dropping learning experiences as they go.
And two things about timing, great example, two things about timing. One being that if we really pull back and look at all that has to orchestrate in the universe just for us to have our little life, and things and meet the people we're supposed to meet, and things change. There's a lot that has to organize in the universe. And again, every choice we make opens up a new set of choices. And even if it seems like a choice got made for us, at some level, I believe we made that choice. One of the things I love about Vedic astrology is because it helps us to see the timing of things. Now, I don't use this science and art as prediction, because I think prediction robs people of choice. But what I do use it for is to help people understand who they are, and the timing of the celestial weather, and so that we can prepare for what the best timing is for something. So, for instance, if someone says, "Hey, I want to move," and I'm like, I'm looking at what's going on in the foundational places in your chart right now. And I'm not saying this is a great time because it's going to cause you too much stress. So if you don't have to, I would really encourage you wait till this time when the energy is going to support you. Also, we know, and as I talk about, this next eclipse has a lot to do with timing. So if we see some energy that's really going to present some challenges, maybe we can defer some choices and make some different choices. But at the same time, we see some supportive energy coming in, and I can see that, this year and next year, then let's run with it. Then we've got that. Then it's like the middle of summer where everything just seems to be wonderful, in the middle of winter where it's dark and we can't see so many things. Maybe it's not a good time. So timing is super important. It's also really important to understand sometimes you're trying to do something and it's not that you're off your path. You're using your gifts. You're on your path. But because of where you are on your path, it's not that you shouldn't even been doing that, but it's not going to unfold as quickly as you would like to. And there's a reason for that, because sometimes the way we pick up pieces of ourselves is by being off in the weeds or going a little bit slower or running into some challenges. This is where I've seen that, the soul does not give us the straight line, the beeline from one place to another. It's a very circuitous path. And I believe that has a lot to do with us just, awakening and picking up pieces and parts of ourselves. So don't get too frustrated with timing. We live in a culture that we should have all had it done yesterday, and we don't. And it'll be very cliche for me to say it's about the journey, but in truth it is, because no matter where you get to, you want to take a journey somewhere else. So with the eclipses that are the second eclipse coming up, which is on December 4th, that eclipse is a solar eclipse, and it's happening in Scorpio in Vedic astrology. And the eclipse, solar eclipse, happens when the sun, on a new moon, when the sun and the moon are together. A lunar eclipse happens when they are opposite one another. It's a full moon. And it's kind of interesting because the full moon eclipse is when the moon is actually exalted in Taurus. And this is the new moon eclipse. The solar eclipse is when the moon is actually debilitated in Scorpio. Everything's good for something. This is the eclipse that is going to ask us once again to relinquish, to let go of something. And because it's in Scorpio, which can be a very deeply emotional place before it gets to the deeper devotion that Scorpio is really about, because of some of the planets involved in it, this is a real change of course. We had a solar eclipse last December, which was a change of course. And solar eclipses, they are like, we're going down the road, and then all of a sudden we kind of wide off to the right or left, and maybe don't notice it right away, but after a while we're looking around, it kind of looks the same, but it kind of looks different. It changes our trajectory. So it's doing that in this paradigm shift that we're in. This is an important eclipse, and it's also shifting our own personal trajectory, specifically in the area of that rules in our chart, and specifically and collectively, I want to say, this is where we are still clearing out the negative, unserving beliefs that we have, the beliefs that are really keeping us to our deeper devotion. And just on a very simplistic level, to use what I'm talking about, would be like, where would you like to, where are your beliefs holding you back from getting down to the purity of what you're devoted to? So that might be what you're devoted to in relationships, might be devoted to in your service in the world, might be what you're devoted to and how you're participating in this paradigm shift that we're in. And how do you know what that is for you on an intuitive level? Where's the shitstorm in your life? Where's stuff coming up for you? Where's a lot of change happening for you? Because you can feel it already, even though I'm not here specifically saying this is where it is for you. Again, you want to look at what are false beliefs for you and get more intimate with those false beliefs and find out what's underneath them, because there is a deeper devotion underneath those false beliefs. They're just trying to keep you safe in some way. And this eclipse will present changes over a 6-month period of time that are going to ask you to let go. So where in your life have you been asked to let go? Your ego is going to think that you're losing. What have you been losing? Whether it's relationship, whether it's, some maybe you're waking up more, so you're losing some of your beliefs. Maybe it's financially for you, maybe it's your work. Where do you feel like the universe has presented you with challenges that make you feel like you're losing? The ego presents that way, but transformation is transcendence, is about letting go of what is, because it doesn't serve anymore, so you can free that energy and then move on to what's next. So this solar eclipse is all about evolution. That's the letting go of a form to break it down into energy. And then the other eclipse on the 19th is more about involution, and that is where we're taking energy and moving it back into form. So these are the high growth areas. Bottom line, between the 18th and about December 5th, that is an eclipse period of time. Things will be unstable during that time. So if you don't have to make major choices, don't have to do something major, don't. If you do, slow down, trust yourself, and keep things as simple as possible, because there's likely to be things that come up. And if you keep things simple and keep timelines simple, then you'll have the bandwidth to deal with them as they come up. Does that make sense?
Perfect. It does. And I know you got to get going. So your website, say it for me one more time.
Yeah, it's Solutionary, spelled S-O-U-L, Solutionary, spelled SOULUTIONARY.com. You can take my free quiz there. I will get over a link to you also that will allow people to be able to get the Soul Wisdom meditation, or just message me and say, hey, you heard me here, and I'd be happy to give it to you.
And what's your what is your YouTube?
YouTube is my name, Prema Lee Gurreri.
Prema Lee Gurreri on YouTube, and there will be little posts and links on this podcast, or on the video portion of it anyway. And obviously in the introduction, I'll mention this quite often. So thank you very much for dropping by, and get out in that nice Pacific Northwest drizzle and have a good day.
It's actually really gorgeous here today, and I'm grateful, because yesterday it was not.
We had a storm hit.
Yeah, it was crazy.
So we had a tornado here last week.
Yeah, no, it's been crazy.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for having me. It's really been a pleasure to have this conversation with you. Thanks for hosting me. Thanks for the work you're doing in the world. Appreciate you.
Oh, thank you very much, Prema, and thanks for putting up with my weird questions. I appreciate you coming by. Thank you very much.
That's it. Let's roll. Hey, let's be careful out there.
I see